Have you ever noticed how every type of show you've ever seen has done a mystery story? Not just every thriller movie has a mystery to it, and not just movies that are dedicated to be mysteries and puzzles you're meant to solve, but pretty much every sitcom you've watched has eventually gotten around to doing a mystery episode. Almost all forms of TV drama have at some point busted out a mystery set of tropes. The mystery-solving storyteller type character is so iconic that we actually just use one of them as a generalized idiom for someone smart. Sherlock. If you approach mystery from the space of existing dominant games, which is to say, mostly I mean D&D. I mean D&D. You know I mean D&D. But in D&D, there is a sense of narrative flow and a certain degree of storyteller liberation. And I know that sounds amazing to say in the context of D&D, but trust me here. But where the idea that the dungeon master can just at any time have someone open the door with, as it were, a gun. And that means that suddenly the system needs to be able to accommodate combat, and whatever mystery was involved, it can be either made unimportant due to threats to life and limb, or it can be suddenly made more of a secondary factor that you solve through instrument of combat. This means that mystery is less of a genre and more of a narrative toolkit, and that you can bring mystery to bear on all sorts of different other kinds of stories. It is a chocolate topping. It is a kind of little black dress. And just like those things, if you apply them wrong, you get some terrible results, such as pouring a little black dress onto your ice cream. I bring to your attention here EUREKA, the tabletop RPG, which is not done. It is on Kickstarter. It is on Kickstarter right now, and I recommend you follow the links and go check it out, because this is the opportunity to get into the ground floor on a game that is still being shaped and still has ways to include things you love in its development. And it's also trying to do something legitimately really interesting, because it's bringing that mystery toolbox and philosophy to bear. Now, I will often talk in the context of tabletop RPGs of games having an approach, an interface, and an offering. Your approach is how does it get the player involved in the game? The interface is how does it let you interact with the story that it lets you tell? And the offering is what kind of story is that? What's the allure? And these are not comprehensively designed to dissect tabletop RPGs. They're just general categories for things that I like to talk about, because it's possible for a game to be very, very good in one area and weak in another, which, especially for less polished, less corporate products, means that sometimes things aren't really given proper respect because they're not delivering in every area as perfectly as they can. And I mean, there are plenty of games that have amazing offerings and terrible interface and approach that still manage to be long-running, multi-generational franchises, like Exalted. EUREKA is a small game made by hobbyists that wants to be their step into being something big and good. This is a golden opportunity for you, especially if you are the kind of person who listens to people like me, to reach out and check out their Kickstarter and tell them what you think of it. Ideally, back it with some money, because that's what a Kickstarter is for, but it is still your opportunity to do what I did and look at EUREKA and find out what you think. And you might be saying, alright, well, what do you think, Talon? And what I want to say up front is there is stuff about EUREKA that I have directly criticized to the developers. It's not relevant here. It's largely stuff that relates to the way the game is presented in text, or the way the game's language is used, things that will be dealt with in time, things that are not structural to the type of game it is, which is important because I like the kind of game it is, and being able to say, hey, you should check this out because I think it's a good example of what it's doing, even if it's not perfectly executed, is so much more interesting than saying, here is a highly polished thing that someone might like. I have not played EUREKA. I simply don't have the time, and also it's not complete in a state that makes it easy for someone like me to get it going. Instead, I want to talk to you about stuff I like about it and how it approaches the meta-genre of mystery stories. The game's fantasy is very strong. The game specifically talks about the way it's supposed to feel. the ideas that it's willing to communicate through its mechanics. The rule set straight up admits there are things that it's limited in doing, stuff it's not good at, things it's not good for, and here's how the game will break if people aren't playing along with it. It also has to make a note that this isn't a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which is interesting because it kind of shows that even in the secondary layer of indie RPGs, there is already the problem of TTRPGs being a small pool in which most people do specific references to large common touchstones. This is a game that uses D6s that are augmented by pluses and minuses, and they're trying to hit target numbers, but that doesn't make this a PBTA game. Specifically, one of the things that PBTA requires is a story unveiled through action, while EUREKA is trying to present you with a coherent, robust puzzle to the start of the story, and then make the story about working it out. There are degrees of success and failure, things you'll probably be pretty familiar with, and mixed in with them, there is the EUREKA system. The EUREKA system is, for lack of a better word, a catch-up system for failure of information. In the context of this game, you are going to be investigating a mystery, and when you succeed at uncovering something, you get information, and that's going to progress you through solving the mystery. But if you fail, you build up EUREKA. And that means that you can investigate and get dead end after dead end after dead end after dead end, and then, when all of those things have brought together a number of things that can't be true, that are impossible, you have the chance for a moment of inspiration that lets you push through that. It is essentially a way that the game stands behind you, ready to catch you if you fail to solve the mystery. But to do that, philosophically, it needs for that mystery to be meaningful. And this is one of the areas where EUREKA feels very different to me of all the PBTA games I've looked at, which is, this game is default failed. EUREKA's fundamental viewpoint is that if nothing happens, the game fails. Players have to have an existing failure state of a narrative to start from, and then they have to solve it. And if they do not solve it, it is not, oh well, we will find some other solution, or a narrative element will kick in and take care of that. But rather, no, you didn't do it, there is a failure, this is going to have a negative impact, this is going to hurt. And this might seem a little strange, or surely you can have this degree of narrative lethality in other games. But for the most part, the point of this game is that if you are solving a mystery, a puzzle, that puzzle needs to actually be hard to solve. Otherwise, you're not solving anything. You are filling time. There's a philosophical point here. That is, this game wants the game to be a challenge in all the different ways it can be a challenge, and then makes the rule system about finding ways to attack that challenge. It's a very interesting difference where normally in other games, to once again invoke Dungeons & Dragons, you have an existing party and then you construct a challenge for them. There are systems in place to make it so that you have a general idea of what kinds of challenges can be present. Level 5 party, level 5 challenges. Whereas EUREKA is trying to touch on something much harder, which is you and the player's ability to piece together information constrained from a factual, predetermined scenario. Mysteries are hard to improvise. They're probably impossible to improvise. I have some experience trying to write mystery stories, and I found them incredibly difficult. They just made my ears bleed. That's the thing with a mystery. It is essentially trying to keep someone from working out something by giving them factual information, but not snowing them. Good mysteries play fair. Famously, in one of the Agatha Christie novels, there's a murder that's solved by the revelation in the last 2 pages that, in fact, it was the murder victim's brother who had never appeared in the story up to that point. Which means that for all the mystery solving you were doing up to that point, the big twist was that none of it was worth anything. You had wasted your time because you couldn't have known about this other out-of-context problem, and that meant that the problem you were solving was in fact not the problem the story was about. That feels bad. So the stories here make a big point of give players consistent information. Give players access to true things. Let them double check information. Let them verify things in the materials and handouts you give them. If you're doing this game online, it recommends copy-pasting descriptions, not reading them aloud, which I know for some people that ruins my theatricality, but it's about what you are presenting to people. You are presenting neutral information in a neutral voice that they can then pick through in detail, because that's the point. The game master of EUREKA is not a storyteller. They are running a game. There's also some nice consideration of legal and moral frameworks not being the same thing. The investigators you play are by default not cops, and it recommends against making them cops. The language framing how you relate to your characters is the character is a piece the player moves in the story, not a person the player is pretending to be. You wouldn't just make me as a guy in the game, because the point of the game is you are making someone you want the story to happen to, not someone you want to be while the story happens to you. There is a lot about specifics in secrecy. There's a rule that says you don't share character sheets, and this is super valuable because it means that if at any point you want to introduce a mechanic, such as exists in the game, that requires one player to be keeping a secret on their character sheet, it isn't weird that that player is keeping it secret, because everyone is supposed to be keeping a secret. Now, all of I'm offering here is effectively this game's offering, not its interface. Its interface is fine. It's a 2d6 system with pluses and minuses. It can have good and bad in that, and the main thing I like about it is that it uses dice everyone already owns, even if you're not a role-playing game person. The offering is really, really good. This deeply entrenched feeling of mystery as value, as puzzle, as secret. I like that. The approach right now is a little shonky. And I've mentioned this to them, and I'm sure they know about this, and if they've ever paid any attention to anything I have to say on TTRPGs, they'll know this is a favourite thing of mine to complain about. The character construction for this game is Chapter 2, which means it's happening after something like 100 pages, which is a bit much. I think that's bad. My advice is to look to musical theatre. By the end of Act 1, people should be hooked, and the best hook is your piece in the puzzle. Musical theatre will warp time and space to make sure that the first act ends on a banger, and character creation is your banger. It is something that you should be putting up front. Give people an impression of the rules very vaguely. You don't need to be specific, but give them something to hold on to while they're learning more, because then it gets to tell them, oh, this is about my little thing I've made, rather than, in 100 pages, we'll get to what you do in all this. I like the wealth skill as well. And I guess the thing I like the most about Eureka is with the Eureka system in place for being informational revelation, it means this game lacks an operational good. In the context of other combat-focused games, or even personal tragedy and disaster games, there is an operational good in the terms of being good at surviving. In most games that are combat-focused, just being good at killing things will always be a skill you want to have, and that everyone should want to have, because killing things will come up very often, and killing things solves a lot of problems in a lot of different types of narrative. This game doesn't have that. You can't just start blasting. Well, there are definitely game genres that you could use Eureka for where you can start blasting. But the default is that that doesn't work. That doesn't solve your problems, and it doesn't make things better. That makes this a very interesting game to sit down and puzzle out. As best I can tell, this is a game that you could use to run an episode of Supernatural, an episode of Columbo, or an episode of Sam and Max Hit the Road. And that says a lot about the applications available to the idea of mystery.